Tim Cain, matching your project and team.
Hi everyone, it's me,
Hi,
Tim.
Tim.
Today I want to talk about matching your project and your team. This is a topic I've wanted to talk about for a long time, but I've put it off because I know I've talked a lot about nuance and context on this channel, but I was trying to figure out a way of approaching this where people didn't immediately think I was denigrating the team or any of the teams I'd worked with. Despite all the wonderful things I've said, I know people will just jump there and go, he's putting down the team.
It is hard to speak. I think I know what he's going to be talking about, which is you don't want to hire a group of people who are experts at making, let's just say, simulation games to make your arcade game, right? I think that's what he means, where it's like you need to find the people and you need to cultivate a team that is built around making the best game that they can and a game that they arguably want to play because there will be more passion in it for them, right? If they know what these games are like, they play games that are similar at home and they want to make one that is better or the one that is reaching a niche that hasn't been reached before. And it's hard to say because of course I can also talk about times where I've worked with people that didn't seem to match the team. And you just what's a good way to put it? There's nothing wrong with them. In fact, some of them are exceptional workers. They're great teammates. You get along with them, but you can tell that this is not the genre for them. Or this is maybe too large of a team for them, that they are better for smaller indie developers, something like that. And maybe that's what he's talking about, but it is difficult to talk about without feeling like you're denigrating that team.
So let me just say this isn't about the people. This is about a reality that I've talked about at length. And it's true for me, it's true for you, it's true for everybody. There are things you're good at, things you're not good at.
Yep.
That's just the truth. So I've talked about all of my strengths and weaknesses, and it's part of the reason when I did The Outer Worlds, I wanted Leonard Borarsky to be the co-game director because he was really good at things I was really bad at. Now, in a perfect world, you will end up with a team that perfectly balances all the strengths and weaknesses.
Not gonna
In
happen.
other words, there are some people who are really good at something that other people aren't on the team. And anything you can think of, there's somebody on the team who does it well. Guess what? We do not live in a perfect world.
Yeah, I mean, you think of it like an RPG game, right? It's like, oh, you need your healer, you need your tank, you need your DPS. But then it's like, well, there's still probably going to be one or two bosses that kind of give you some trouble, right? It's the same thing with teams of any industry, any size. They're even just expertise. It's like you have to double down sometimes on the things that you know and that you know that you're good at because you can do that better than other teams. I'm not very good at making sports games. I'm not a really big fan of sports games. I don't know if I could design one. You put me on the team, I'm gonna be very, very lackluster. But I've worked on a lot of RPG games. I'm good with systems, so I make games with a lot of systems-driven content, right? Like Golden Chronicles, there's a lot of systems at play here. That's what I'm good at. That's what I like. That's what I enjoy. I believe I can do that better than other developers of similar experience levels on my own. That doesn't mean I'm the best, but I'm far from the worst.
Which means that you're always going to end up with a project design and a group that doesn't 100% mesh.
Mm-hmm.
Now, over my career, I've had, luckily, fortunately, experienced both ways of putting together a team. I've got to pick people for a project, like Arcanum.
Yeah.
Arcanum, Leonard and Jason and I designed out almost everything before we hired a single person. So as we hired people, we tried to hire people who matched the game we were trying to do.
I mean, and we'll be able to do that with Golden Chronicles, right? We will have our first playable before most people are hired, and we can then specify, okay, we know that this aspect of the game is very important, and that I don't really know how to do it, right? Like something like artistic. Then we can specifically seek out somebody like that. But that's absolutely much easier in some ways than it is to just have a team that gets thrust a game idea from like the person in charge or from a publisher. Usually it's a combination of both, or if it is self-published, then it's going to be from the creative director or one of the producers. And it may not mesh with everybody that's on the team, right? I get people who are very interested in alchemy and potions, and then we work on, I don't know, the Nightmare Lake idea, right? Which is a strategy game. There might not be people that are very interested in the strategy game, and you can expect turnover. You can expect people who want to stay because they like the company, they like the benefits, they like the people, but that this game in particular is not really their cup of tea, and they're going to wait for the next one to have more of a say on what happens, right? That's normal. It happens. I mean, that's why a lot of studios stick to one genre, is because they can cultivate a team that they know likes and has a lot of experience with that genre. It is what it is.
Even then, we ended up with so many features that were so wildly different and required so many different kinds of expertise that we didn't end up with a strength in every area of the game. But in the past, this isn't how it tended to work. Usually, especially if I worked at someone else's company, I was just assigned people.
Yep.
I had a project. It was assigned to me. And I've done games both ways. I've done games where a lot of the design was done and then people were assigned. I've also done games where we started working on design, we got people assigned, but the game wasn't really well designed and we designed it for our strength. Fallout is a perfect example of that. Fallout was a game made on the strength of the people who happened to get assigned to it. I even talked about that
It's a smart way to do
one
it.
of my Fallout videos because I said I made 3 engines, an isometric engine, a 3D engine, and a voxel engine. And as a side note, nobody talks about voxels these days. They were like the hot shiz in the 90s. Everybody thought they were going to be the next big thing, and they went away. That's half the reason I don't like to talk about current events, because you never know.
There's still an
The
interest,
things that
though.
are super popular now and everyone's talking about, no one will even talk about next year. So my voxel engine wasn't very good, but neither was the 3D engine. 3D engines just weren't there yet when we made Fallout. It was low poly, so people and creatures and props all looked pointy, and the textures were low res, so everything was covered in a texture that was smudgy and smeared out. Like the ground, you look at the ground in old 3D games, and it's just a grass texture that's been smeared
Yeah.
out over way too large of a set of polygons. So, had we made Fallout later, and I think Leonard and I talked about this in our chat, we would have made Fallout 3D. It just would have made sense, but not back in the mid 90s. We used the isometric game. The isometric game was the best one. Could the 3D engine have been better? Yes, that was not my strength. So, Fallout was made with what that team could do the best, and that's the project you got. Now, let's compare this to movies. In a lot of movies, the director picks the cinematographer they want to work with. They get to pick actors they want to work with, script writers, an editor, and they try to pick all these people for the strength they think they need. Like the script writer writes a script and they think about what actors would play these roles well. Oh, we're going to need this kind of cinematographer. There's going to be a lot of low light shooting or a lot of action shooting or a lot of outdoor shooting. Let's pick a cinematographer who's good at that. Now, imagine trying to make a movie and people just get assigned to you. And it's random, and some of them have very little experience. Imagine you're going to make a big movie like Titanic, and instead of Leonardo DiCaprio, you get assigned a recent acting school graduate. Now, you might get lucky.
I think there's some reasoning for this where, and I'm not saying that this is better or worse, but I think there's some reasoning where it's easier to separate the leadership of things that are required to make a movie, like the cinematographer, like the writers, like the person in charge of costumes, or the person who builds the sets. And with games, it's a bit more muddled to where it's more difficult to nail down the person who was in charge of blank that looked good. I mean, it sounds like it's true to me, and everything that I know about game dev. You don't really have names of these individuals being thrust into the limelight in the same way that people who are part of movies often are. I mean, yeah, he makes a great point though. I never really thought about it that movies are a lot more handpicked than that, and games you're just kind of seen as a developer. You are a designer. It doesn't really matter your specialties. You're kind of expected to be flexible in a way that you may not always be. I don't know. I don't know. I gotta think about that one more. But he brings up a really good point.
And end up with a graduate who just knocks it out of the park, but you probably won't. Even the best actor needs experience to hone their craft, to what do they call it? Um, Come in, get in touch with their instrument. I don't know anything about acting. So the same thing has happened in games, except since we don't get to pick people, we end up with a collection of people with strengths and weaknesses. Now, let's just say, given that you cannot ever have the perfect team, what do you do when you have a team that is weak in some area you need in the game you're designing? Well, you can just not do that game. You can either redesign the whole thing. You can look at your team and go, okay, I understand the strengths and weaknesses of this group. Let's redesign the game from first principles to go for our strength. I guarantee you this will, A, piss off your publisher, whoever's giving you money. Whoever's giving you money will be like, we were talking about making this game and now you're making this game.
Been there.
Anyone in charge of you, leads, managers, VPs, will be really upset. But you're also probably piss off the team because
In the cases that I've been a part of, it was those managers making that call. So they weren't pissed off. They thought they were in the right. I was pissed off. Um, but yeah, I mean, we did that with the submarine game. It's just like, okay, this game is going to require technological skills that we don't have yet, and our time is better spent on the things that we are more interested in and are better at individually. So we'll shelve this idea until we have the team or we have team members that we can then come back and reanalyze this with, right? Like a competent art director, somebody maybe who is really good with water, things of that nature. So yeah, it's like sometimes you have to say, okay, we thought this would work. It isn't going to work. Not with this team. So we'll revisit in the future, or we'll try to redesign it. Sometimes you can't redesign it with the people you have, or it changes the core idea too much that, yeah, it's not the same game anymore, right? Comparing a cast of a movie with a team that makes games is a bit off. Cast of a game are the characters, not the programmers. Well, they're still workers. I think the cast of a movie is a bit different, but comparing um the like the technical people, right? Like the screenwriters or the cinematographer, the director, that makes a lot of sense. More people, and then fire everyone. AAA devs. Managers who are themselves not skilled in the field, they're managing just a management degree and experience in another field, but they got the job because of connections. Good luck. Yeah, been there. Been there, done that. And sometimes those people can be really good leaders and they can be really good at organizing. But usually the people that are really good at doing that also understand I don't know this field. I can handle the people. I cannot handle the things that they're saying and they need. So they delegate that to other leaders, right? To like leads of teams, things like that. And that can work. That can work.
because some of those people came on board because they wanted to make this game. And they'd already started to make things for this game.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're making this game? So no one will be happy with that. So you
True.
can drop it down a level and say, okay, I've looked at our team strength and weaknesses. I'm going to take out some design elements of this game that we're weak on. And I've done that. What you have to do
You
is
should do
A, pray the thing you're taking out isn't mission critical. Like if one of your design pillars of your game was, amazing gunplay for combat,
Yep.
and you can't find anybody who's good at that, at the
Shit.
design or code of that, and you take that out, oops, there went your action RPG based on fantastic gunplay. just had one of its pillars removed
Yep. Well,
or severely weak.
he's exactly right. I mean, we look at Colden Chronicles, right? We have alchemy, we have open world, and we have storytelling. And it's like very quickly into making Spoon's story, we realize, oh, we're going to need more writers than we thought. And we know that we're going to need a narrative designer that is out of this world, or somebody who is so dedicated to and excellent at handling crisscrossing storylines that they feel comfortable taking on this degree of work. Because I do not. And I'm very slow. So I can do the prototype characters slowly, not super well, but we know that when it comes time to hire somebody like that, we need to hire somebody that is at the top of their game. I can handle the alchemy system. You know, it's a lot of work for me, especially right now because I'm the only one that's doing it. But this is something I feel comfortable with. Anything artistic though, no chance in hell that I can handle it. They can be good at what they do, but they will either be taken advantage of or they'll be doing the stuff you said. Yeah. Yeah. Getting taken advantage of is pretty common in game dev too. Sadly, especially for juniors. Juniors working at companies with really bad management and bad practices, taken advantage of, sadly.
Weakened, and you weaken a pillar, the whole thing crumbles. But also, you have to hope that even if you design out that element because you don't have anybody who's really good at making it, you have to hope the players aren't going to notice, hey, this thing that I expected to be in here isn't here. Why? No, I wonder why this is missing. And you don't really want to do interviews and go, yeah, none of us were good at doing that, so we tossed it. So you usually just go, oh, we went this direction.
Yeah.
Trust me, I've watched videos where I'm like, I'm reading the subtext of this director and I know what he's really saying,
Same.
which is they couldn't do it.
Yep.
They couldn't figure it out. You have other options. You could just go ahead and do it. You could say, you know what? Let's go ahead and do the gunplay. It'll be weak, but maybe we can shore it up by having really cool weapons. And
Sometimes that can work also. Perfect pause. But sometimes that can work, and sometimes players will respect that. They'll be like, you know what, this was kind of weak, but the rest of the game was good, and the developers actually tried it, and they'll get better. They absolutely will get better. I promise you, whatever mistakes they made in the first one, they're not going to make in the sequel, right? So by choosing not to try it at all, you could be shooting yourself in the foot from actually trying to get better, right? What's a good example of a just incredible sequel? I guess you could say Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2. You could see the progression, the very, very real progression of Rockstar's teams at making immersive simulators, perfecting their ragdoll mechanics, adding in nuance to the systems of the game, adding in attention to detail to story elements. You can see this progression, and it's getting better and better and better. And I do hope that GTA 6 goes even further with this. You know, and it's because they just went in, they made the game. Some things weren't perfect, but they tried, and they're getting better. Biggest thing is their optimizations. Yeah, their games run well. Their games run really well. I mean, they do a lot of good work on making these games run on surprisingly meager hardware. I mean, GTA 5 ran on the PS3. PS3. Wild.
really cool perks and mechanics, even though the gunplay itself is kind of mushy. I've seen people do this. You shore up the weak parts of your game with really great parts of the game in other areas.
Yes.
And that's a way you can do it. In the past,
as long as it isn't frustrating, it can be kind of shit. It just can't be frustrating. If you're bad at combat, you have two choices. Either don't do it at all or do it simply. Right? You can try your best, but just know if it's frustrating, find a way to fix that, because that's worse than being bad. Players can accept something if it's bad, if it's just meh. But the moment it's frustrating, you've given them a much worse experience. Star Wars Outlaws is a fantastic example of me playing it recently. That game was just frustrating to engage with in a lot of cases. Very, very frustrating. And because of that, even though the game was mediocre, Starfield was mediocre, but it didn't have a lot of cases where I was frustrated to interact with it. it was just kind of mediocre. And I came out of it thinking, you know what? I liked some parts, didn't like other parts. I don't regret my time with it. Star Wars Outlaws, it's a very similar situation where it's just but it was frustrating. And I came out of it thinking I did not like my time with that because even though there were things that were good, the frustrating aspects are the ones that I remember the most.
Past, one thing that happened was you just took on a lot more of the work yourself, especially if it was like, well, the team isn't good at this, but I've done this before and I'm still better at this than some of the people on the team. I'll just do it. But the problem is, what if you're still weak in that area? You're still going to have a weak
Yeah.
designed part of the game, a weak feature. But even if you're not weak in it, does that just mean you do way more work? That you're crunching, that you're spending weekends at the
You gotta
office?
share
What
that
happened to
knowledge.
your work life
Yeah, you gotta
balance?
share
The
that
thing that's
knowledge.
become really important. Are you just allowed to go, oh, sorry, our team isn't good at this or as good, so we're just going to work a lot harder? I don't think that's a good idea. Now,
Don't
there are
fuck
other
with your work
solutions
life
that
balance.
people would absolutely hate. One of them is after a game goes out, you lay everybody off. You lay everybody off. And then
Tim,
when you go to make a new game,
Tim, don't give them ideas. I know what you're saying, but do not give the AAA companies any more ideas. They don't need it.
you hire for that game's design. You want good gunplay? You hire someone who's good at it. You want good lighting? You hire someone who's good at it. People would hate that. Guess what? That's how the movie industry works. The unionized movie industry consists of people who work project to project, and in between projects, they're not attached to anything. And the side effect of that is if you're hard to work with, you find it hard to get attached to something even if you're good at it. So it's a very competitive, type of
The
work.
entire entertainment industry is competitive.
Another way to do it is make your company so large that you probably have people who are good at just about anything you can think of.
Yeah, like Naughty Dog, for instance. And this is just one example. CD Projekt Red is the same way. You share people. You say, okay, well, we need this team for a month to work on this feature. So the producers will sit down and they'll say, okay, well, we needed them for this system, but we can delay this system, and you share people, or you let them move between projects to prevent burnout, to let them work with new people, learn some new things. It's hard to do with designers, but you can do it sometimes with like art people, like 3D artists, as long as they understanding to handle both game styles, or programmers to some extent too, as long as they can learn the code base fast enough. But designers, you generally don't want to share designers between games because they need to be thinking deeply all the time about one game, and it's really hard to do that with two games. Very, very difficult.
But big companies aren't necessarily the best at using their manpower like that and moving people around. Two, a lot of people hate
Rockstar
being
is.
moved from project to project.
Yes,
Like,
some people do hate that. I
you're
hate that.
thrown into some project when it's at some stage, you do the lighting and then boom, you're on to the next project. Trust me, every audio designer in the industry knows what that's like.
Yep.
They get thrown into projects when it's at a certain stage, they put sound effects in, they put music, and then they're on to the next project. But also, a lot of you don't like games made by big companies. You call them soulless, you call them passionless. So I'm not sure that's the best solution either. So
I agree. But though, it depends. It really depends because I look at a game like Red Dead Redemption 2. There's no way anybody who can play Red Dead Redemption 2 and say that that game is soulless. That you don't feel the little minute passion of a developer who you don't know the name or face of. You feel that at every moment in that game, but most AAA games are not like that. And I think one of the reasons is that you're diluting the creative pool. Like there's only so much creativity you can realistically put into a game. And when you have more people, you're limiting the amount that one or two people can really apply to it. And so it's like, yeah, I love The Last of Us Part 1. But there's probably a lot of people on that team that didn't have much of a contribution to it from like a creative level. Like they worked on some of like, a couple of meshes or whatever. They balanced some things. You don't really feel that, right? You especially don't really know what like designers have touched. It's easier to say, okay, well, this team of coders worked on this system, this artist worked on these meshes, or this level. And I feel that a lot with AAA games, where it does feel soulless because it just doesn't. I don't feel like I'm being shown a story from one or two people's perspective. And I think that when you do have like writers or designers, you need them to have a large voice, but for that not to mean that nobody else in the team has a voice. And I think that's a difficult thing to manage for somebody in charge of a project, for like a director. It still needs to feel like it has cohesion, and you're not going from one level to the next, and it feels like you're just jumping between a different person's view of what the game should have been like. It needs to feel like it's consistent and cohesive.
So, if we're back to making games with a smaller talent pool, because if you don't want a big company, I can only think of two solutions. You either make a game that contains some parts that aren't as good as you wish them to be.
Yeah.
You designed something that expected it to be this good and to support all these other things in the game. It was only this good because that's the best your team could do. Or you make an entirely different game, and a game that plays to the strengths of your team. I've done it both ways. Like I mentioned, there's problems with both of those. So I don't see a good solution. I just see a lot of solutions that you're going to have to decide. And even if you're a solo developer, even if you're out there and you're an indie solo dev going, this will never apply to me, it does. You've got strengths and weaknesses
He's
too.
right.
So you're either making a game with some parts that aren't as good because you're not good at it, or you're making a different game than something you may want to make because you simply don't have the ability to make the parts you want. I almost said, I hope you guys like this video. This video was not about the people so much as how you make projects with people and the problems you're going to run into on any project made with any people. As I wanted to put it out there as this is the reality of any project based or team based project. It's just the reality. It applies to games, it applies to movies, it applies to making cars. So try to keep that in mind when you're putting together a game and a team. Try to match them as well as you can, and then make some tough decisions in places that there is no match.
He's 100% right about that. I think that I was trying to collect my feelings on that, and what I think is true is that players by and large prefer if they can sense passion in a project, even if some of that project is not very well made or is a little bit janky. If they can say, you know what, I can still feel the passion though, they'll come out of that with a better experience than if they don't feel like there was passion applied to a game and the game was just mediocre. I know I'm not saying that Star Wars Outlaws wasn't made from very passionate people, but to me when I played it, there were certain aspects that I didn't feel much passion in. They were mediocre, and to me as a game designer, I could look at them and say, there's no way in hell somebody who would understand this even at a basic level would make the decision to have the gameplay like this. There's no way. And so, it just leaves me wondering what the hell happened. I can't say what happened. All I can say is something happened. Something that happened that either it was a forced decision by a manager, maybe it was just a developer who didn't really understand this, like the stealth. Like maybe they just weren't competent with this. And so you ask yourself, okay, well, why are they trying to make a GTA Red Dead Redemption style game when they clearly don't have the ability to? And then when I play it, again, it goes back to what I said. It felt frustrating to play. Even if there might have been some passion there, I didn't feel it because I was too frustrated to focus on it. So, just pour passion into your game and try to reduce those pain points so that even if there are things that are janky or things that aren't as well made as they could be, players at least don't find them frustrating, even if they find them a little bit shallow. That would be my advice. So, yet another great video from Tim Cain. Hope you guys liked it. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. And try to visit me on these streams sometime. And if you can't, no worries. I'll upload it all to YouTube anyway. So, thank you, and catch you in the next one.